The next section deals with love of Allah. Now that we talked about love between one another, we now want to briefly touch on, this is a very extensive topic. Again, we could have hours-long discussion on all of these topics. We want to briefly touch on the topic of the love of Allah. So let me say that when a person starts engaging in these things, avoiding sin, doing dhikr, keeping good company, all of these things are going to lead to an increased love of Allah. It's just a natural consequence. And this then needs to be maintained. And the number one way this is maintained is through hijab. Through hijab. Now, I know when you hear the word hijab, the common thing is, why do I have to wear a scarf? But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about another type of hijab, a broader concept of hijab, which is basically to create some degree of separation between two things. So the way this is designed, the way that a person is able to maintain this love of Allah is to create hijab between them, between their hearts and the dunya. So let's start by saying that the heart is such an organ that it can only love one thing at a time. Either it's going to be in love with the dunya, or it's going to be in love with the akhirah, the things of the akhirah. These two things they're water and oil, they don't mix. There's space for both, there have to be, because you have to exist in the dunya, you have to sail the dunya to get to the akhirah, so everybody has to sail on the ocean of the dunya. We're all ships that have to cross the ocean of the dunya, we can't avoid that. But we certainly don't want our ships to be flooded with the water of the dunya, such that we don't get to the akhirah, if you understand what I'm saying. So generally speaking, we should understand this concept of keeping hijab from the dunya. If we engage in the material world and busy ourselves with the material world, we tend to keep hijab of Allah. We're not in the masjid, we're not engaged with the Quran, we're not engaged with dhikr, we're not in the company of good people. And what's going to happen? The heart's going to fall in love with the dunya. That's just the nature of the heart. The heart falls in love with whatever you expose it to. Whatever the eyes see goes to the heart. Whatever the ears hear goes to the heart. Whatever the tongue speak goes to the heart. So if I'm sitting and looking at houses all day, and I'm online at Zillow all day, and I'm driving around every day looking at the neighborhood houses, and I talk to all my friends about houses all day, and I'm thinking about houses all day, I'm going to be in love with houses. When I put an offer in and I don't get the house, I'll be crying for 3 days. I can't cry for my sins. I can't cry because of the grave. I can't cry because of the hereafter, but I'm going to be crying and crying when my house doesn't work out for me. So this is one example. And in this case, the heart has become connected with the dunya, and a person has basically done hijab from Allah. Now what's the opposite? The opposite is to engage Allah. The eyes are constantly looking at the signs of Allah and remembering Allah. They look at the sun and the moon and the grass and the trees and the earth and the creation, and it's just a constant tasbih. Subhanallah. Awesome. Alhamdulillah. Amazing. La ilaha illallah. That's a person who's engaged with Allah. Now the heart becomes impassioned with Allah and is driven to experience this deen in a way that very few things can drive any human being to do. And the dunya becomes second nature. Yes, I need to get through it, but I'm not going to focus on it. If it comes, it comes. I'm going to give it its due. I'm going to fulfill the mandates and the rights of my family. I'm going to earn a halal income and fulfill my needs and share with others. But it doesn't become the focus. Dunya isn't the problem, by the way. Whatever you have, no problem. It's when a person is focused on it, looking at it, thinking about it, speaking about it, hearing about it. That's all that they do all day. That's when it becomes a problem. So we generally speaking, hijab is protecting the eyes, the ears, the tongue, the mind from the things that are of the material world and focusing instead these on the experience and the reminders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we engage Allah and do hijab of the dunya, we don't look at the dunya, we cover the dunya, we don't listen about the dunya, we don't worry too much about the dunya, then we become lovers of Allah. So those seeking Allah should know that they should leave everything that doesn't pertain to them. Those seeking Allah should leave everything that does not pertain to them. General principle of Tasawwuf. Yes, those things that pertain to me, I should excel in and I should give attention to. I am a professor of medicine. I treat patients with cancer every day. I have to put time into that. My eyes do spend time thinking about my work, reading, studying. I do talk about how I can better serve my patients. I do express and listen and learn, but it's not a distraction, because that's not dunya. That's service of creation. I do have to buy a house. I do have to take care of my family. I do have to put up food on the table, but that's not dunya. Those are necessities. What is dunya? This exaggerated hope in the material things of this world. That somehow, if I go beyond what I've been provided, I'm going to gain something. I'm going to turn my whole qibla in the direction of the pursuit of A, B, or C. I'm circling like how I should be circling the Kaaba. I'm circling material things in this world. I'm worried about and consumed with where I live. I'm worried about and consumed with how I look. I'm worried about and consumed with my fashion, my car, my bank account, my wealth. These are means for an end. When they become the end themselves, that's called dunya. Like I said earlier, dunya is an ocean. Everybody has to sail across the dunya, the day they're born till the day they die. But it should never be that the water enters the ship or it will sink a person. That's dunya. To recognize that we have to sail the ocean, but we don't want to be sunk by it. So this is what we mean when we say that those seeking Allah should leave that which does not pertain to them. Meaning they should sail the ocean, they shouldn't bring the water into the ship. The best example of this is, of course, the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet ﷺ says, from the beauty of one's Islam, min husni Islam al-mar'i, tarkuhu ma la ya'nih, is leaving that which does not pertain to him. Listen very carefully. From the beauty, from the husn, from the ihsan, from the beauty of a person's Islam, tarkuhu ma la ya'nih, leave that which does not pertain to them. And this is a very broad statement. We don't need to be involved in the things that don't matter to us. What does it matter to us? All the talking that occurs all day. These funny videos that are on YouTube, they're like 24/7. What does it matter? Sometimes, you just look at what these are, and it's just like, scratch your head and just say, what is this? What is going on? What is happening? Like, this has nothing to do with me, has no benefit, is completely external to anything relevant to me. And hours and hours and days and weeks and months and years are wasted on this stuff. No way can Islam grow to its full beauty with this kind of involvement in things that just aren't relevant. There's just so much irrelevance. Honestly, I would even say to you, I know this is going to sound a little extreme, but I'll say it. Even all this like Islamic lectures, they have such limited relevance. Like, what are we doing lecture after lecture after lecture and just entertaining ourselves? It's like the lecture has become the goal. The goal of a lecture is to be inspired to worship Allah. When I hear a lecture, it should drive me to the masjid. It should drive me to the musalla. It should drive me to the Quran. And the majority of my time should be spent in the Quran, in the dhikr, in the masjid, in the doing of good deeds, not in the message itself. Let me give you the most perfect example. The salah of the Prophet ﷺ on Jumu'ah was longer than the khutbah. Stop and think for a minute. The salah of the Prophet ﷺ on Jumu'ah was longer than the khutbah. If anybody had more to say, it would have been Rasulullah ﷺ. But the purpose of the khutbah was to drive to the salah, and the salah drives to goodness. So now, if it's like Islam becomes a continuous reel of YouTube videos, you go from wasted videos to Islamic videos, like that's the Tasawwuf of today. I made tawbah, I gave up the foolish videos, and now I just stream all day Islamic videos, then I would argue that we still haven't gotten to the point where we're supposed to be at. Fine, it's better than what it was before, and perhaps it maintains people's deen. I'm not putting it down, I'm just asking us to take one step beyond. Every single interaction has a purpose, and that purpose should be the worship of Allah, or the expression of that towards humanity. This is the good deeds, basically. So, yes, we gain knowledge, but if we just sit and gain knowledge all the time, and it doesn't lead to the worship of Allah, then we have shortchanged ourselves. The purpose of knowledge is to translate that to worship, and the purpose of worship is to translate that to good deeds. Let's put it that way. So you're going to find that the Prophet ﷺ would make statements, and then the Sahaba would engage in worship, and then they would express it in good deeds. And then he would make more statements, and the Sahaba would engage in worship, and then they would transform that into good deeds. Like I've said before, worship is a potential energy. It should be converted into the kinetics of deeds. Worship is a potential energy that gets converted to the kinetics of deeds. So we've got this paradigm. We gain knowledge, we worship to deeds. And all of this is like a paradigm. So we need to keep everything in balance. And honestly, even at the level of what's Islamic, we should still ask the question, how relevant is this to us? Forget about what's non-Islamic. I'll tell you, the daily news, relatively irrelevant. You can pretty much find out what you need in 5 minutes. You can look at the digest, if it even matters. The vast majority of what happens one day is not relevant 3 days later. The vast majority of what happens 1 month is totally forgotten 2 months later. There's a few major events that you might need to be aware of, but most of what happens is ping pong back and forth. Doesn't matter. Unless maybe you have some high position in the ummah and you need to understand what's going on so you can guide the people. That's a different story. But for us common people, it doesn't matter. Don't need to be sitting and reading the news all day. The news is just, a lot of it is who knows what. We have to identify what's relevant to us. And then we need to remove everything else. And that allows the beauty of Islam to be expressed. Min husni Islam al-mar'i, from the beauty of a person's Islam, tarkuhu ma la ya'nih, it says leaving that which does not pertain to him. All the la ya'nih should be removed. Now, yes, with a caveat here, sometimes you need to relax. You need to do something that's going to relax you because you have a certain amount of stress in your life, and so you do something for relaxation purposes. That's a good thing. That's not excluded. That does pertain to you. So exercise pertains to people. Playing sports pertains to people. Having a hobby pertains to people. I'm not saying you have to leave everything. In the sphere of Tasawwuf, we don't teach that. We teach balance. But we also will identify the things that are detrimental and eventually bring a person to what is the aim.